Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
Now, that's their own words, but that's basically saying that this Messiah was going back all the way to the beginning, to Eden, the beginning of creation, and his entire destiny was to suffer for the people.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
We've been on a quest on Foundations to learn all we can about the person the Bible calls Mashiach, the Messiah, about whom the Bible has a lot to say. It would be true to say that for most of us, we have no difficulty in believing that Jesus, Yeshua, is unquestionably the Mashiach. But for some, still struggling over the issue, we're going to focus on one particular psalm to see if we can identify some specific similarities between what David prophesied and what we read about Jesus.
Speaking of prophecies, we've actually looked at a number of prophecies that detail about either the life or behaviours or what happens to Messiah, and looked at some mathematical probabilities, which is pretty far out if you really want to get down to the mathematical grittiness of it. To me, it's an open and cut case. To me it is. But as you said, there are still a lot of people who are unsure. And we're looking at the biblical concept or idea of Mashiach. There's been bazillions of them throughout history, but the Bible has the most to say. And what's been really fascinating is that we're reading the same scriptures, Jews and Christians that is, and yet we're coming to completely opposite conclusions.
Yeah, that's right.
But as you said, we're going to look at Psalm 22 to look and see what it says, to see if there is any similarity between what actually happened in the life of Jesus. It's hard to get my head around still to this day. When you read the same scriptures, you look at the life of Jesus, and you've got Jews who will absolutely die before that they will admit that Jesus is the Messiah, and yet as Christians we would die rather than deny that he is not the Messiah. Right. So anyway, but there's a lot of history behind this.
Well, there is, and let's just look at some of the history of this psalm in particular. Psalm 22 was understood that it was written by King David in the late 6th century, around 587, the experts think. So roughly 600 years before the birth of Christ. There is a little bit of debate as to whether it was written all at one time or whether some verses were at a later date, but certainly it was written around that period of 600 years before Christ.
So there's about 31 verses in Psalm 22, and we're going to focus on just a number of the verses, not the whole lot because it would take too long, and see exactly how or why it is that so many in the Jewish community discount Psalm 22 as being about the Mashiach, because in their mind it sounds too Christian. It sounds really Christian.
Well, I mean, yes, right. If a Christian reads it, you sort of think, well, this is describing the crucifixion. So I guess from that perspective then of the Jewish community, who would they say Psalm 22 is written about?
Well, funny thing is they really say that it's actually about King David. Rabbi Yossi Mizrahi, he said that Jesus cannot possibly be the Jewish Mashiach because when he was on the cross, he begged God to save him, and because God didn't save him, and because he was unable to save himself, he says he cannot possibly be the Mashiach, and that's his argument. And then I've mentioned Rabbi Rashi before. Yeah. He also believes that the lament in Psalm 22 is because the Hebrews were destined to go into exile, and that David was reciting this prayer in Psalm 22 about the future of the Israeli people, the Jewish people. He's basically saying Psalm 22 is about Israel, not the Messiah.
Okay. Well, are there any Jewish writings that would say that it is about Messiah? Because you'd expect there must be some.
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question. There are. And I've got to say that this research actually is not my own. It's from Dr. Itan Bar from the Ministry of One for Israel. It is the best website. It is such a great site by Messianic Jews to reach Jews. It's really good. But anyway, he says that there is a famous midrash. Now, a midrash is basically an ancient Jewish commentary on the Bible, like the Talmud and the Mishnah and all that. And it's from the 8th century. It's called the Pasikta Rabbati. And it actually does attribute some of the words from Psalm 22 as coming or being about Mashiach. This is what it says, quote, "It was because of the ordeal of the son of David that David wept, saying, 'My strength is dried up like a potsherd, my tongue sticks to my jaws, and you lay me in the dust of the earth.'" That's basically a quote from Psalm 22. Yeah. Now, according to that particular 8th century Jewish Bible commentary, King David was describing the future suffering and the death of Mashiach, the son of David, not David himself. Yep. So here's another portion from the same Midrash, and it says, during the 7-year period preceding the coming of the son of David, iron beams will be brought low and loaded upon his neck until Messiah's body is bent low. So there it is. They're saying it's Messiah. It goes on and says, then he will cry and weep, and his voice will rise to the very height of heaven, and he will say to God, Master of the universe, how much can my strength endure? How much can my spirit endure? How much my breath before it ceases? How much can my limbs suffer? Am I not flesh and blood? And during this time, the Holy One, blessed be he, will say to him, Ephraim, my true Messiah, long ago, ever since the 6 days of creation, thou didst take this ordeal upon thyself. At this moment, thy pain is like my pain. At these words, the Messiah will reply, Master of the universe, now I am reconciled. The servant is content to be like his master. Now, that's their own words, but that's basically saying that this Messiah was going back all the way to the beginning, to Eden, the beginning of creation, and his entire destiny was to suffer for the people. Isn't that amazing? That was the understanding of the rabbis. Okay, this is basically a commentary. It's like a personal, in my own words kind of description by these rabbis. Okay. And it was written by Jewish sages, non-Christians, in the 8th century. Now, in another portion of exactly the same Midrash, it says of the Mashiach, the Messiah, it says, Ephraim, our true Messiah, even though we're thy forebears, thou art greater than we, because thou didst suffer for the iniquities of our children, and terrible ordeals befell thee that did not befell the firsts of the lasts. And thine eyes grew dim from fasting, and thy strength was dried up like a potsherd. All these afflictions on account of the iniquities of our children.
Wow.
So they're basically saying this is the Messiah who is from ancient times, and he is going to come and he's going to suffer for our children, for us and our people.
Yeah. So I guess that's already saying that Psalm 22 is this anguished prayer of a martyr who suffers and dies for the sake of his people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this was the understanding of the Jews for most of Jewish history. It's really been in more recent centuries and very much modern days where they've just become really, really determined that it cannot even remotely be connected to Jesus, the Messiah. That's just too much. It's just too big a step for them to take. And there's a part of me that kind of feels sad and a part of me that feels frustrated. Sad because this judicial blindness is something that has come upon them from God. I can't condemn them for being blind. But at the same time, it's blatantly obvious that it's not talking about David.
Well, when we return, we'll look more at this Psalm 22 and find out who it is really describing and try to clear up some of the misunderstanding. That's next time on Foundations.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.